At 17, she was like any other ambitious teenager with big dreams. She lived in a small town, but her heart was set on a future that felt so much bigger than the world around her. She had always believed that there was more to life than what she could see in the small, quiet streets of her neighborhood. And then, there was the day she met him, the man who would shape her life in ways she couldn't have imagined. It happened at a career seminar organized by her school. They invited a guest speaker, a businessman who had made it big in the corporate world. He was not just any businessman. He was the CEO of a thriving company, a self-made millionaire who had started from nothing. His name wasn't important to her at the time. It was his presence, his energy that caught her attention. He spoke with such confidence and passion, his words weaving a picture of success that seemed out of reach for people like her. The way he carried himself made her believe that one day she could be like him, too. As the seminar came to a close, the students were given a chance to ask questions. She didn't expect to stand up and speak, but somehow she found herself raising her hand. She wasn't sure why she was doing it, but something inside her urged her to take the leap. When the microphone was handed to her, she asked a question about the path to success. His answer was thoughtful and encouraging, but it wasn't what stuck with her the most. It was the way he looked at her, like he was seeing something in her that she hadn't even realized about herself. After the seminar, there was a brief opportunity to speak with him personally. He was surrounded by other students, but when he saw her standing there, he made his way over. She still remembered how nervous she felt, how she tried to sound confident, even though her heart was racing. He smiled at her, and in that moment, she said something that would stay with her forever. She told him that one day she would marry him. It was a bold, even outrageous thing to say to a man she barely knew, but it felt true, almost like fate. He smiled and laughed, probably thinking it was just a naive teenage remark. But to her, it wasn't just a passing comment, it was a promise. "Remember this moment," she said with a grin, and he nodded, probably thinking she was just like any other high school girl with fanciful ideas. Little did he know, that moment would become the spark of a lifelong ambition. After that day, life moved on. She graduated, went to college, and started building the future she had always dreamed of. But every time she faced a challenge or a setback, she would remember her promise. It wasn't just about marrying a successful CEO one day, it was about believing in herself, believing that she could achieve something big. It was the driving force behind every decision she made, every step she took towards her goals. College wasn't easy, and neither was the early part of her career. She faced doubts, struggles, and even moments where she questioned if it was all just a fantasy. But with each passing year, she grew stronger. She worked harder than anyone around her, always reminding herself that she wasn't just working for a career, she was working for a promise. She made it 17. She never spoke about it to anyone, but the idea of one day meeting him again, in a different light, was always there, fueling her determination. She graduated and landed her first big job at a prestigious marketing firm. It wasn't the company of the man she had promised to marry, but it was a step in the right direction. The corporate world was tough, and it took a lot of effort to climb the ladder. She had to prove herself day after day, sometimes working late into the night, and even missing out on social events and weekends. But she knew it was all part of the process. Every email she sent, every meeting she attended, she did it with the hope that one day she'd be in a position to fulfill the promise she made when she was just a teenager. Years passed, and life continued to unfold. She met new people, built her career, and moved closer to the kind of success she had always dreamed of. But every time she thought about her career, a small part of her still wondered about that one person, the CEO. What was he doing? Had he remembered her? Did he think about that moment they shared years ago? Or was she just another face in the crowd? But just as she started to settle into her life, something happened that she hadn't expected. An opportunity rose that would bring her one step closer to her childhood promise. It was a job offer from a company she recognized, the very company that the CEO of her dreams had built. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the company's name on the offer letter. It wasn't a coincidence. It felt like fate had stepped in, guiding her once again toward that dream. The excitement she felt was overwhelming. She had worked so hard, and now, it seemed like everything was falling into place. She was about to work at the very company that had once been a distant hope in her mind. But this time, she wasn't just an aspiring teenager with dreams, she was a professional, ready to take on the challenge. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. Her journey was about to take a turn she never saw coming, and the promise she made all those years ago might just become more than just a youthful dream. The offer letter sat in front of her, the words blurry as she tried to process what she was seeing. It felt surreal. After years of hard work and countless sacrifices, she was about to join the company that had once seemed so out of reach. But more than that, it was the company of the man who had unknowingly become the centerpiece of her childhood promise. At 25, Emily had come a long way from the 17-year-old girl who made that outrageous statement. Back then, it had felt like a whimsical idea, something a teenager might say in a moment of excitement. But now, standing at the threshold of an incredible opportunity, she couldn't help but feel that her past had led her to this point for a reason. She had grown in ways she never imagined. The college years had been difficult, filled with late nights studying, trying to balance work, and struggling to find her footing in a world that often felt too big for her. But those years had also shaped her, pushing her to be independent, to never settle, and to keep pushing forward. When she first entered the corporate world, it felt like being thrown into an ocean where everyone else was already swimming. She was surrounded by people who seemed to have everything figured out, while she sometimes wondered if she was even in the right place. But one thing she had that many of them didn't was an unwavering determination. Every setback, every failed attempt, only pushed her closer to her goal. The promise she made at 17 wasn't just a simple desire to marry a millionaire CEO. It had become a symbol of everything she wanted to achieve. Yet, even as she climbed the corporate ladder, the idea of Alex the CEO lingered in the back of her mind. She'd never forgotten about him, but she had also learned to keep her emotions in check. She wasn't a wide-eyed teenager anymore. She was a woman with her own career, her own ambitions. She had to be, especially in a world where every day felt like a battle for recognition. But that job offer felt like something more than just a career opportunity. It was a chance to prove to herself that all her hard work had led her here for a reason. And maybe, just maybe, this was the universe's way of showing her that the promise she made wasn't just a foolish dream. It was part of a much bigger plan. The first day at the office was a blur. The building was massive, its glass windows reflecting the city skyline. Emily couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nerves. She had worked in corporate settings before, but this place was different. This was the heart of it all, the company that had built an empire. She could feel the energy in the air, a constant hum of productivity and ambition. Her first task was simply attend a meeting, get to know her new colleagues, and learn the ropes. As she sat in the conference room, listening to the discussions, she couldn't help but glance around, wondering if today might be the day she would cross paths with him. But Alex, the CEO, was nowhere to be seen. The day passed in a whirlwind of introductions and corporate speak. She was introduced to her team, assigned a few smaller tasks, and quickly realized that the work here was demanding. But it was also exactly what she had hoped for: challenging, fast-paced, and full of opportunities. She was finally where she had always dreamed of being. Weeks went by, and Emily settled into her role. She threw herself into the work, determined to prove herself. But as much as she enjoyed the work, something was missing. The thought of Alex still lingered. But it wasn't just about meeting him anymore, it was about seeing how he led the company, how he shaped everything around him. There were rumors that he rarely interacted with the employees, preferring to keep a distance. But Emily was determined to get to know him, to see if he was truly the man she had admired all those years ago. Then, one fateful day, she got her chance. She was working late on a project when the office door opened, and there he was, Alex. He walked in, as charismatic and commanding as she remembered. But this time, there was no seminar room, no crowd of students. There was just him, and for the first time in years, she was face to face with the man who had been the center of her teenage dreams. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. Alex didn't recognize her, of course. She was no longer the young girl who had made that bold promise. She had changed, but still, there was something in her that remained connected to that 17-year-old girl with a dream. Working late? Alex asked with a smile, his voice warm and engaging. Emily nodded, trying to keep her composure. Yes, just finishing up a few things. Excited to start on the new project? He nodded, his expression serious but thoughtful. Well, we're all counting on you. It's an important one. I trust you'll do well. His words, while casual, carried weight. She felt the pressure of the moment. This was her chance. But how could she tell him the truth that years ago, as a teenager, she had made a promise to marry him? It seemed ridiculous now. So instead, she simply smiled and nodded. I won't let you down. As he walked away, Emily stood there, staring after him. The reality of the moment hit her. This was what she had worked for. This was the man who had inspired her to reach for something more than she ever thought possible. But now, she realized something important. The dream had changed. It wasn't about simply fulfilling a promise anymore. It was about proving to herself that she had become the kind of person who could make her own dreams come true, whether or not they involved him. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She had come so far, but there was still so much ahead of her. And maybe, just maybe, fate wasn't done with her yet. The days blurred together as Emily continued to immerse herself in her work. But there was an undeniable undercurrent of tension building in her. She had settled into her new role with efficiency and precision. But every time she stepped into the office, it felt like someone was always just out of reach. She had worked so hard to get here. But now that she was in the same company as the man who had once been an unreachable dream, she found herself questioning everything. Alex, the CEO, remained a shadow in her life. He was always there, somewhere in the background, his presence evident in every meeting, every corporate decision, every ambitious project that moved the company forward. Yet they hadn't crossed paths again after that first brief encounter. She had kept her distance, focused on proving herself. She wasn't the naive teenager who had made that outlandish promise anymore. She was an accomplished professional, fully aware of her own worth. But still, she couldn't help but wonder if fate had led her to this moment for a reason. One afternoon, Emily's manager asked her to take the lead on an important project that would require collaboration with other departments. She accepted without hesitation, diving into the task with the determination she had always carried. But the real twist came when she learned that the project would be personally overseen by Alex himself. Her heart skipped a beat. It was the opportunity she had been waiting for, but the excitement quickly turned to nervousness as she thought about the possibility of working closely with him. What would it be like? Could she handle the pressure? She had spent years building up this idea of him in her mind, but now she would see him as more than just the CEO. She would see him as the leader of the company, the man who had unknowingly influenced the direction of her life. When the meeting was scheduled, Emily tried her best to keep her composure. She dressed carefully, professional but approachable. Yet even as she prepared herself for the encounter, she felt that old rush of nervousness bubbling up. She was no longer the same girl she had been when she first made her promise, but there was a part of her that still felt that youthful excitement when it came to him. The day of the meeting, she entered the conference room with a sense of purpose. The room was filled with colleagues, all eager to discuss the project, but as soon as she walked in, her gaze instinctively moved to the end of the table where Alex sat. His presence was commanding, even from a distance. He was older, more refined, but there was still that same magnetic energy that had captivated her all those years ago. Let's get started, Alex's voice rang out, smooth and confident, drawing everyone's attention. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to focus. She had a job to do, and she wasn't about to let her personal feelings get in the way. The meeting unfolded, and Emily found herself speaking up more than she expected. She had done her research, prepared thoroughly, and had ideas that seemed to resonate with the team. Every time she spoke, Alex listened intently, nodding as she explained her thoughts. It wasn't long before Alex addressed her directly. "You've got some interesting ideas, Emily," he said, looking her straight in the eye. His words weren't much, but the way he said them, his gaze fixed on hers, felt like a weighty acknowledgement. She could feel her face flush, but she managed to maintain her composure. "Thank you, Alex. I believe this project has a lot of potential, and I'm excited to see where it can go. There was a moment of silence before Alex smiled. A small, knowing smile that made her heart skip again. "We'll see what happens. Keep it up." For the rest of the meeting, Emily felt as though she were in a dream. The promise she made all those years ago seemed so far away now, and yet, it was so close at the same time. She wasn't the same girl she once was. She had worked for everything she had achieved, but there was still that old spark inside her, that tiny thread connecting her present self to the girl who had dreamed of a future with this man. When the meeting ended, Alex stood and gathered his things, preparing to leave the room. Emily stood as well, gathering her papers, but she couldn't help but watch him. He was everything she had imagined him to be: strong, charismatic, confident. But there was something else now, something that made him more real to her than ever before. She wasn't just a young girl with a dream anymore. She was a professional, a force in her own right, and Alex had just noticed her. For the first time, she felt like they were on equal footing, even if it was just for a brief moment. As the meeting dispersed, she tried to shake off the feeling that had been building inside her. Was it just the thrill of working with someone so influential? Or was it something deeper, something that had been quietly waiting for years to resurface? The next few days passed, but Emily couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. She had proven herself, but something had shifted. She realized that the feelings she had for Alex weren't about the promise anymore. They were about something else, something much more complicated. She had admired him from afar for so long, but now, she had seen him for what he truly was, not just a distant figure in her past, but a man with his own complexities, his own struggles, and a leader she could learn from. And yet, even as she continued to excel at her work, something lingered in the back of her mind. She couldn't help but wonder if their paths were meant to cross again in ways that neither of them could have predicted. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the promise she had made as a teenager was no longer just a distant memory. It was now part of her reality, intertwined with her ambitions and her future. And in the quiet moments, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Weeks passed, and Emily found herself becoming more entrenched in the whirlwind of corporate life. Her project was progressing, and her reputation within the company was steadily growing. But despite all the success, there was a nagging feeling she couldn't shake. It wasn't just about the work, it was about Alex. Every time she walked through the office, his presence was felt, even if he wasn't physically there. She was now deeply embedded in the company, but her connection to him was still something more elusive, something she couldn't quite define. As the days blended together, Emily found herself working longer hours. The pressure of the project had become more intense, with deadlines looming and expectations rising. But there was another pressure, to something more personal. Alex had been distant in the weeks following their first meeting. He hadn't spoken to her one-on-one again, despite the work they shared on the project. It made her wonder if he had forgotten about their brief exchanges, or if he had intentionally distanced himself. It was on a late Thursday night, as Emily sat alone in the office, finishing up a presentation for an upcoming meeting, that she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up, startled, only to find Alex standing in the doorway of her office. His sharp suit and confident posture made him look like he had just stepped out of a boardroom meeting. But there was something different in his eyes this time, something less businesslike, something that made her heartbeat quicken. "Late night?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Emily straightened, suddenly aware of how the late hours had worn on her. She didn't want to appear caught off guard. "Yes, just wrapping up a few things for the presentation tomorrow." He stepped into the office, his presence filling the room in a way that made her feel both small and empowered at the same time. "You've been putting in a lot of work. I've been hearing great things." "Thank you," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm just trying to make sure everything is perfect." "Well," he said, moving to stand closer to her desk, "perfection's a tough goal. But you seem like the type who likes a challenge." Emily smiled, her nerves suddenly fading as she realized he wasn't here just to check on work. There was something more, something unsaid that made the conversation feel more personal. She didn't know what it was, but it made her feel like the professional distance between them was slowly slipping away. "How's the project coming along?" he asked, leaning slightly forward, his voice softer now. "It's going well," Emily answered. "We're on track, but I've been working extra hours to make sure we're ready for the final pitch." Alex nodded, his eyes scanning her face as if weighing her words. "I like that kind of commitment. It's not easy to stay focused when the pressure's on, but it looks like you're handling it well." Emily felt the weight of his gaze, and despite herself, she couldn't help but feel like he was studying her not just as a colleague, but as someone more. It was hard to ignore the electricity that sparked between them in those moments, and even harder to ignore the feelings she had buried for so long. "I just want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to help the team," she replied, her voice quieter now. For a moment, there was silence between them, thick and heavy. Alex seemed to be considering something, his gaze still locked on hers. And in that silence, Emily realized something. She wasn't just working to prove herself to him anymore. She was working to prove something to herself. She was no longer the girl who made a promise at 17. She had become her own person, strong and capable. And if the connection she had with Alex was anything more than professional, she needed to be sure of it, not just for him, but for her. Alex broke the silence first, his voice low and thoughtful. "I'll tell you this, Emily. I've watched people come and go, and it's rare to find someone who truly invests in their work, like you do. You've got something special." Her heart raced as his words sank in. There was no mistaking the meaning behind them. She wasn't imagining the warmth in his tone, the admiration in his eyes. But even as she felt a rush of emotion, she knew she had to keep her focus. Her professional life had come so far, and she couldn't afford to let personal feelings cloud her judgment. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I'm just trying to do my best." Alex's expression softened, and he took a step back, giving her space. "Keep it up," he said with a nod, then turned to leave. "I'll be watching you closely." The words lingered in the air as he walked out, leaving Emily standing alone in the quiet office. She had always dreamed of being in the same room with him, of sharing moments like this. But now that it was happening, she wasn't sure what it all meant. Was it just professional admiration? Or was there something deeper here? Something neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. As the door clicked shut behind him, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the promise she had made so many years ago was now closer than ever. But this time, it wasn't just about fulfilling a childhood dream. It was about understanding what her own heart truly desired. She had spent so many years working towards this, and now that she was here, she had to decide what came next. Was she ready to let go of the past and embrace whatever future was unfolding before her? Or was she still holding on to that 17-year-old girl's promise, waiting for it to come true? In the silence of her office, Emily didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure: things had just become far more complicated. It had been a month since the late-night encounter in her office with Alex. But for Emily, it felt like it had happened just yesterday. She couldn't shake the way he had looked at her. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just professional acknowledgement anymore. It was something deeper, and it was driving her crazy trying to figure out what it all meant. Her career was thriving. She had delivered the final pitch for her project with exceptional results, earning praise from both Alex and the rest of the leadership team. But despite the recognition, something was different now. Every time she saw Alex, her heart skipped a beat. Every meeting felt charged with an unspoken energy, and she couldn't tell if it was her imagination or if he was feeling it too. It wasn't just about the promise she had made as a teenager. It was more than that. The years of hard work, the sacrifices, the endless late nights, all of it had led her to this point. She had fought so hard to be taken seriously, to prove herself worthy of a seat at the table. But now, she was facing a new challenge, deciding what kind of relationship she wanted with Alex, and whether it was worth pursuing beyond the professional walls they had built around themselves. One evening, as she sat in her office preparing for a final presentation before the board, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching again. It was Alex, but this time, something was different. She could tell by the way he walked toward her, more deliberate, more purposeful. He didn't stop at the doorway. He came right in. "Got a minute?" Alex asked, his tone a mix of business and something else, something softer. Emily nodded, trying to keep her composure. "Of course. What's up?" "I just wanted to check in with you before the presentation tomorrow," he said. his voice more personal than it had been before. "I've been thinking a lot about the project, and I'm impressed with how you've handled everything. I've seen a lot of people come and go in this company, but you stand out." The words caught her off guard, not because they were unexpected, but because they felt so genuine. Alex had always been professional, a little aloof even, but this was different. He wasn't just acknowledging her work, he was acknowledging her. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice steady, but her heart pounding. "I've worked hard for this." "I can see that," Alex replied, leaning against her desk casually. There was something about his proximity, his presence in that moment, that made her feel like everything had shifted. "You've got the kind of drive that's rare. Not everyone has it." Her breath caught in her throat as she realized something. This wasn't just about work anymore. She wasn't just Emily the employee. She wasn't just the girl with the promise anymore. She was someone he saw, someone he was starting to acknowledge as more than just a colleague. The thought made her pulse race, but she pushed it away. This was still a professional relationship, after all. She had to keep that boundary clear. Alex seemed to sense the shift in the air as well. He paused, his gaze dropping briefly before meeting her eyes again. "You know, Emily," he started, his voice quieter now, "I never forgot that first conversation we had all those years ago. You know, when you told me you'd marry me." She froze, unsure of what to say. She had buried that memory for so long, never intending for it to resurface. But hearing him bring it up now, in this context, made her realize how far they had come since that moment. The promise had always felt like something naive, childish even, but now it felt like part of their story, a story that had evolved into something much more complex. She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled, the weight of the moment settling between them. "I was just a kid back then," she said, her voice soft but steady. Alex studied her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before his lips curled into a faint smile. "Yeah, I know. But you made a promise, and I don't forget things like that." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Emily wasn't sure how to respond. She had spent so much time working to prove herself, but now she had to figure out how to navigate this unexpected emotional territory that was unfolding before her. "You've worked hard to get here," Alex continued, his tone still thoughtful, "and I respect that. But don't let the past define you. You're not that girl anymore, Emily. You're your own person." His words struck a chord with her. She wasn't that girl anymore. She had spent so many years holding onto a promise, chasing a dream that seemed so distant. But the reality of it, the connection they shared now, the respect he had for her work, made her realize that the promise had evolved into something more complex. It wasn't about a marriage anymore. It was about mutual recognition, about understanding that they were both capable of building something together, not as a fantasy, but as equals. "I'm not the same girl," she said softly, meeting his eyes. "And neither are you." Alex nodded slowly, and for a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them. It was clear now that whatever had been between them years ago had grown into something else, something real. But what that something was, neither of them was ready to define yet. The office around them, once just a place of business, now felt charged with a new energy, an energy that wasn't just about the work, but about what could lie ahead. "Good luck tomorrow," Alex said, breaking the silence. "I know you'll do great." "Thank you," Emily replied, watching him turn to leave. As he walked out of her office, she sat back in her chair, the weight of the conversation sinking in. The promise she had made at 17 no longer seemed like a distant fantasy. It was a part of her past, yes, but it didn't have to define her future. She had built a life and a career of her own, and now, with Alex in the picture, it felt like something even greater was unfolding, something unexpected, something neither of them had planned. The story was far from over, and this time, Emily knew she was ready for whatever came next.